Hi, Dr. Dave Hindmarsh, and in the part 2 episode, when we're talking about data. So in part 1, we touched upon the mean, median, mode, and we sort of flirted a bit with normal distributions. If you haven't watched that, make sure you go back and watch that first, as it's really useful for this way. So in this next part, we're going to talk more about confidence intervals and then sort of how that goes into the normal distribution. So again, we've got our patient with a whole load of his blood pressure readings. He's taken them over months, and so we're just trying to sort of suss out how they're going to go. We can see here initially this is a week's worth of blood pressure readings, but if we add more and more and more and more, that they sort of tend to this bell-shaped distribution, often called the normal distribution or Gaussian distribution as well. So the normal distribution is the way that there is normal variation in nature and there is normal variation over certain readings. And we can calculate the percentage underneath that bell graph between certain areas. And there's sort of so many standard deviations away from the mean. From a scientific aspect, normally 95%, so around 2 standard deviations away from the mean, generally covers that sort of 95% underneath. And that's useful for us because it then allows us to see what data is present and which one is normal or abnormal. Sometimes there can be skewed data, okay? So if you imagine you've got something like house prices or even pay, where larger variations can sort of drag things out to those who are earning a lot more or it's costing a lot more. And again, if it's normally distributed, so it's equal on both sides, the mean, the median and the mode are all equal. So it's all lovely and plush. As you can see from this diagram, when it's negatively skewed, the mean is sort of pulled downwards by that outlier. And so the mean is the smallest value, followed by the median and then the mode. And it's the reverse for positively skewed, okay? So you've got the mode being the smallest value, so that's at the other end, and then the median, and then finally the mean. With all of these values, I normally keep it in alphabetical order and sort of remember it that way. So mean, median, mode always stays the same, and then equal if it's normal, sort of smaller than if it's negative, so it's sort of almost pointing towards the negative side, and then positive being the other way. The so what is that we can start to use this distribution to try and suss out where we sort of push our resources from that way. So here's an example of a lineup of students and their heights, and you can see that someone already, I've robbed this off the internet, has already put a normal distribution above this. From a scientific aspect, what we're looking at is that the higher and the lower values are sort of really showing these are where we need to sort of show our evidence and push our sort of who we need to worry about. So in both cases, someone who may be abnormally tall, we maybe think about have they got sort of growth hormone abnormality that's sort of like pushing things forward. And likewise, those who are particularly short, have they got any malnutrition? Again, hormonal deficiencies that we need to look into further. So the confidence intervals gives us a rough estimate of sort of a range of values which we say is true and that we sort of, if we agree with that data. And it can be set at any value, just remember that. And it should dictate, whenever you're reading that value, what the confidence interval is set at. So classically it's 95% if it's not stated, but sometimes if you want to be more accurate, you could go higher. And we'll touch into that why. So again, this is just sort of demonstrating that we've got lower limits, okay, sort of with a set mean and with the upper and lower limit, and it's sort of the outliers are the bottom high and bottom low 2.5% to get us that 95%. What we can do then, if we're looking at an experiment, is that we'll get 2 sets of data with normal variations that we can say that there is a significant difference when those two, when taking the 95%, that they don't overlap. So the theory being that if a value falls below or above that 95% value, that it can be deemed to be significant, okay? And that we're saying that those values there, that it is unlikely to have risen from sheer chance alone. So we're going to touch upon a couple of questions to prove that this is not always the case. So fetus is shown to be small for gestational age on multiple visits. Mother went under extensive investigations and the child was found to have no abnormalities and no effect on long-term development. What type of error could this demonstrate? 1, 2, both type 1 and type 2, neither 1 nor type 2, a type of bias. Bear that in mind, we're going to explain why. So question 2. Research study looking at new antihypertensive drug A has the null hypothesis that there is no difference in blood pressure reduction between drug A and the standard treatment drug B. The research project does not have adequate power and reports that there was no difference. It's later discovered that there is a difference in blood pressure reduction between these two drugs. What type of error has occurred? And it's the same answers. Okay, we're going to explain them both, so don't panic if you don't know them now. So confidence intervals. Before you do anything, you need to set what's called your null hypothesis. So it's touched upon in question 2. So your null hypothesis is that everything's the same. Nothing's changed. Nothing that you can do is any different. Your alternative hypothesis is always that there is a difference. And you can get this wrong. So a type 1 error is when you falsely reject the null hypothesis. So they're both, that nothing's there, or that it's that something has changed, when actually it's completely normal. Okay, so the null hypothesis that there's no change, and you've said nope, that's incorrect, there is a change there, and it can be set to the confidence level of the test, whatever the p-value is set to. And we're going back to our childhood heights example. So even though we've drawn this arbitrary line of saying like, right, you're really tall, you're really short, you must be odd or weird, that actually they might just be normal. You've always got someone who's taller, you've always got someone who's particularly shorter. Doesn't mean there's any abnormality to them. And this is an example of a type 1 error. So guess what? We've answered our question. So going back to this one, we know now that because a fetus has been investigated extensively and was found to be completely normal, that it is just demonstrating that there is normal variation of this. So this is a classic example of a type 1 error. The other example then is a type 2 error, and we're falsely accepting the null hypothesis. So we're saying that actually there's no difference between the two. And the main reason for this is that is basically down to a poor design of study, which has generally got a very small sample size or is underpowered. So think about your initial types of investigation, whether that be sort of a case series or sort of professional advice, that basically you haven't got the numbers, you can't prove it because you just haven't got the sort of the sheer weight of numbers behind you from there. So this then answers our second question. Okay, so in this you can sort of see that the initial investigation was, say, maybe a small sample or a small population, and even states in the question that it's underpowered. Okay, and so because of that, as ad nauseum, type 2. So if you see anything to do with type 2 error and power, that's what you're looking for. Fab. So we've done 2 videos now sort of talking about data, going through mean, median, mode, and then sort of like trying to mesh the two together, talking about normal distributions, bit on skewed data, bit on confidence intervals, and then leveling it all off nicely with type 1 and type 2 errors. Just remember, this is part of my 20% series, so I've got 3 other videos available, more are being added all the time, so make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out. Dr. David Hindmarsh, very, very best of luck with your AKT, and I'll